Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you another gambit in the Caro-Kann, the Ulysses Gambit. That's really weird and it doesn't really work, but it's still a decent attempt at complicating the life of a Caro-Kann player. It may work on lower levels, but I'm going to show you a bulletproof way to fight against this. Now, the Ulysses Gambit has been played over 130,000 times. White wins 43% of the games on lichess, so it's not completely harmless, and obviously black can go wrong. So how do we start? So after e4, c6, knight f3, d5, there are many normal moves here for white, of course, but white plays d4, sacrificing the e pawn. And the idea is that after black takes, and black should take it, white goes knight g5. Now, knight g5 is an interesting move because it creates a double threat. It threatens to play bishop c4, targeting f7 and provoking e6, which would shut in black's bishop, and black would have a bad version of the Karpov Caro-Kann. And it also threatens to just regain the pawn with knight e4. Now, that being said, playing knight g5 and knight takes e4, even if you manage to do that as white, should give black an equal position. Regaining that pawn with the knight is okay. Of course, you want to take the pawn, but you don't really want a knight on e4. So black has many options here, at least based on what players play on lichess. I'm going to show you the bad moves first and explain why you shouldn't play them. So first of all, what are the moves black can play? Knight f6, bishop f5 is a move. Then queen a5 check is an option. f5 is an option, defending the pawn. e5 is an option, trying to trade queens and destroy white's center. And h6 is a playable option, chasing the knight away. Out of all of these moves, only two moves are good. And if you do play the Ulysses Gambit as white, I'm going to show you how to gain a significant advantage against the bad moves. First of all, if you're playing a beginner and you go knight g5, well, they may go f5. This is a dreadful move. It's almost losing for black if the player with the white pieces knows what they are doing, and there is a very simple reason for that. You have given up control over these squares, basically, and white can easily, very easily, get a knight into f4 at some point. So, for example, knight c3 here. Also, this pawn isn't moving anywhere. Because you moved the f-pawn, this diagonal is weak. So queen h5 is always a problem. For example, if you play h6, well, then you can resign. Also, because of queen h5 check. Also, with the pawn on f5, the f7 square becomes even weaker. Not that it wasn't weak before, but at least you could go e6 and have a safe structure and a place for your king. Now when white goes bishop c4 and you go e6, it's just resigns. Very bad. So most people with black play knight h6, preventing knight f7, winning a full rook. And here is why this is bad. We go knight c3. Black plays something, I don't know what. Maybe b5, that's the most common move at least. And we now go bishop b3. After they go a4, a5, threatening a4, we can simply go a4, saving the bishop. Most people will play b4, and now the knight is coming to e6. So knight e2, knight f4, knight e6. So black is losing here. I mean, you can play weird moves like bishop a6 or bishop b7 or knight a6. Knight a6 is in fact the most common move, completely losing for black. And after knight f4, it's just hopeless. Turn on the engine, it's going to say +3. The best move is g6, although I don't understand g6. e5 is the second best move, queen c7. Whatever black plays, we go knight e6 and just crush black. So on knight g5, f5 is the first move that we shouldn't consider at all as black. And I hope I explained why. Now let's look at another bad move. Many people play queen a5 here. queen a5 check, thinking, oh, it's a double attack on the knight, but the knight's defended. So you're helping white develop. Some people play queen d2 here. That's unnecessary. Do not trade queens. Some people play c3 here. That's unnecessary. You need that square for your knight. So just go bishop d2. And the pawn on b2 can never be taken. Most people as black are going to continue this ridiculous action with queen b6. Please don't play b3. It's unnecessary. Just take the pawn on e4. And if black plays queen takes b2, then after knight c3, white is, according to the engine, winning. But even from a human perspective, we have such a huge lead in development, and black has to play something like queen b6 just to make sure the queen isn't in trouble. Bishop c4, and now winter is coming. I mean, look at the pieces. Look at the bishops, look at the knights, look at the queen being able to come to h5. Black's best attempt is e6, and this is just abysmal. I mean, the queen is on b6, that's about it. You can take the pawn on d4. Again, it doesn't matter. White castles, queen takes d4, helping develop even more. The rook is coming to d1. This is a tremendous initiative. And there are really no easy ways to develop for black. If black plays something like knight bd7, that's too slow. If you turn on the engine, it says +2. Knight d7 is the best move. Very, very bad. So knight g5, not f5, not queen a5. Now let's refute another move, e5. Many people have played this. Maybe thinking, well, the queen attacks the knight. No. There is a bishop on c1, and this almost loses for black. White can simply ignore the d-pawn. Do not get tempted to take on e5 or defend the d-pawn. Just continue aggressively. Bishop c4. And again, f7 needs to be defended. If queen d4 now, black loses due to a queen trade and knight f7, losing the rook. So most people play knight h6, but now it's way too late. We go knight e4, we have regained the pawn. If queen d4, we can safely trade, but we can also go queen e2. If queen e2, bishop f5, knight bc3 defending the knight, bishop b4 pinning and threatening to take. We can unpin. Just a good position for white. We're castling queenside. The center has blown open. The e-pawn is weak. You can never castle kingside and defend the e5 pawn. And white is significantly better. Not winning, as was the case with f5, but something in between queen a5 and f5. Very, very bad move to go e5. Now let's look at the sensible moves. The two sensible moves are bishop f5 and knight f6. It doesn't matter in which order you play them, although I would recommend that you play knight f6 first, because playing bishop f5 invites g4, which can be tricky to deal with if you don't know it. If you play knight f6, there are no issues. So why bishop f5 and knight f6? Because we know that white is going to play bishop c4. We know that. And if bishop c4 comes, then at some point we are going to have to play e6. Therefore, bishop f5 is slightly more promising than knight f6, but I'll explain why knight f6 is slightly better. Let's look at bishop f5 first. If we go bishop f5, white has only one way to complicate things here. g4. And we cannot take the pawn on g4, it's defended by the queen, so bishop g6. And now many people make a mistake here as white. They go h4, threatening h5, but they are not threatening h5, because after h4, black has the simple h6, and you have to move the knight. The knight has to go to h3, and now the bishop has a safe square. You have basically lost a tempo with h4 and g4. It doesn't work. So on bishop g6, the best move is bishop g2 for white. And black will continue knight f6, simply defending the pawn, knight c3 attacking the pawn once again. And here you have a couple of options. It's not easy to defend the pawn now, of course. You have to do something drastic. So either e5 or h5. The best move is h5 for black. And after gh5, simply bishop h5 attacking the queen moves to d2, and now e6. Continue developing. We have distracted the bishop, and this is fine for black. But it's tricky to play. It's tricky to play because our position isn't safe. This is why bishop f5 isn't the best move. The engine still says black is significantly better. This is -1 for black. However, there is a better move. On knight g5, black has to play knight f6. And this is just a very, very safe, very simple position to play. White has two moves here. Most people make a mistake of playing the move knight c3 first. Why is that a mistake? Bishop c4 is the best move instead of knight c3 for one very simple reason. If you start with bishop c4, you are threatening knight f7 immediately, and black has to play e6. There are just no other options. So what did we achieve now? If e6, the bishop is on c8. So at least for the pawn, we have a strategic edge. And I think this is the main downside of playing the best moves against the Ulysses Gambit for black. Here, if you turn on the engine, it's -0.5. Black is better. Black is, of course, up a pawn. However, yeah, you have to deal with the bishop. Most people are going to play knight c3 here as white, then bishop b4, white castles, for example, unpinning, bishop c3, bc3 defends the pawn, and h6 chases the knight away, the knight goes to h3, and black castles. So black kept the pawn. And one of white's main ideas in these positions is to go f3. f3, why? Because we want pressure down the f-file, and we want to threaten bishop takes h6. So if f3, most people with black are going to take that pawn and be worse. You can actually be worse, up a pawn. Why? Because after ef3, queen f3, there is huge pressure on the position, and you simply have to defend the knight. If you make a random move, then bishop h6, and, whoa, sorry, my mouse is just bad. Bishop h6, and if you take f6 hangs. So you have to play knight bd7, and you're no closer to developing this bishop. White can now simply play a4, preventing b5, and if you play b6, I take the pawn. If you don't play b6, then you have to go queen c7 to continue development, to defend c6, but then I have bishop f4, and it's extremely uncomfortable. Not to mention that after something like knight f4, e6 could be weak. So, if you get this position and white plays f3, or if you play the Ulysses Gambit, you hope that black takes. If you play this with black, don't take. Play b5. This is a very important tempo. After bishop b3, a5, provoking a4. And we can now take, distracting the bishop, and go knight d5. We are attacking the c3 pawn, which would double attack the rook and the queen, so fe4 would just lose an exchange. White needs to play something awkward like rook a1, and now bishop a6, we gain a couple of tempi. You know, c4 is of course playable, a4, and the position goes on. Do not take on f3 prematurely. So that's why bishop c4 is the best move against knight f6. Now let's have a look at what most people play. By far, the most common move after knight f6 is knight c3, trying to attack the pawn. This doesn't work. Black is going to keep the pawn, solve all the strategic issues with the move bishop f5. Now there is no g4 because the square is defended twice. If you go g4, I take it. Okay, so when white plays bishop c4 in this position, e6, and now we have defended f7, the bishop is outside of the pawn chain, g4 cannot be played. Therefore, there is absolutely no compensation for the pawn. Most people with white are either going to play f3 or queen e2 targeting the pawn. If you play queen e2, I can take on d4. So that doesn't work. Most people try queen d4 and then bishop e3 for some initiative, but queen e5 and the pawn is sufficiently defended. White is going to castle queenside, but there is no danger. I can go knight bd7, bishop e7, castle kingside, or I can castle queenside if I'm feeling suicidal, which I'm not. So queen e2 doesn't work, so most people are going to go f3. Now we can safely take. ef3. Knight f3 is better than queen f3, although most people will play queen f3. Queen f3, just queen d4. Queen f3 is a straight up blunder, but just losing the pawn. The bishop is defended. So knight f3 is the move we should look at. You're down a pawn, unfortunately, and there is no compensation for the pawn because the bishop is on f5. So when white castles and black castles, that's the end of the line. Something like bishop g5, knight bd7. Black has a very good Caro-Kann. The bishop is outside of the pawn chain. e6 is defended. f7 is defended. I see no reason to play this gambit if you're going to play this way. So once again, on move 5, if black plays the best move, knight f6, go bishop c4. At least that way, even though the engine likes black, you'll have provoked e6, shutting in the bishop. I hope you got something from the video. The Ulysses Gambit is something I've encountered last week. I had no idea it existed. I had it in a bullet game and they defeated my opponent very easily. I played knight f6, bishop f5, they went knight c3, and I just played normal moves and won. If you play this with white, my advice is that you stop playing it, and if you play the Caro-Kann and face this, I hope you crush it every time. Thank you for watching, stay tuned for more chess, and bye bye.